Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Welcome to the course of Educational Psychology related to learning and instruction. Today, our topic is about learning theories, which is one of the important topics in educational psychology. So, let us start. The first question that comes into the mind of any student would be, why learning theories? What is the purpose of learning theories? Or why learning theories are so important in educational psychology and in education? The answer is very simple, because learning theory determines and affect the teaching style of a teacher. Whatever is the teaching style of a teacher would finally affect the learning in the class. Remember, if a teacher believes in behaviorism, then most of his teaching would be focused on improving a particular kind of desired behavior, or would be aim at weakening a particular behavior, and would lead the class teaching through a series of stimulus, response, and reinforcement. And similarly, if the teacher believes in cognitivism, then the teacher would introduce most of the schemas and the mental processes in the class. So the learning theory finally affect the teaching style of any teacher. And with this, the activities introduced during teaching are also based on learning theories. As already discussed, the teacher learning theories or his belief in a particular learning theories would also affect the different activities. Whether the activities are based on behavior, or they are based on mental processes, or they are based on constructing different kind of information, all these activities would be polished or would be designed by the learning theories that the teacher believes in. The third is, assessments are also based on learning theories, because if a teacher uh, conduct or use a particular teaching strategy or a teaching style, then his assessments are also based on his teaching styles. And therefore, the kind of test that is made by a teacher to assess the different kind of levels, whether they are of the Bloom taxonomy or objective that are based on some other kind of principle. So all these tests, all these measurements, all these evaluations would be completely based on learning theories. The assessments may have questions that can measure a particular kind of behavior, or they can be based on measuring some kind of memory based practice, or make the student to construct or to involve in some kind of particular activity to design and to construct new kind of information. Now let us discuss some of the general learning theories which are used in education psychology. Though we can see a number of other theories as well, but mostly we can categorize them under these three levels as well. So we have behaviorism, cognitivism, and constructivism. Let us explain each of them in detail. So we start with behaviorism. Now the question is, what is behaviorism? As one can see that the word includes the word behavior. So it is some learning theories which is related to behavior. And with relates to behavior, this would be dealing with some kind of stimulus and response. About the cognitivism, as we can see the word cognition. So this would relates to understanding, or relates to mind, relates to brain. So relates to mostly information processing and development of schema. And the third is constructivism. So as the name represents, it relates to constructing information. So this would include inquiry-based learning and discovery learning. So we start with behaviorism first. Behaviorism believes that learning should focus on observable and measurable behavior. Behaviorism believes that learning is related to behavior. It is modification of behavior. It is improvement in behavior, improvement of desired behavior. And remember, the behavior is observable. Besides, behavior should also be measurable, which means we can also trace the development of behavior. We can measure the behavior. Either the behavior can be strengthening or improvement in a behavior, or it can be a weakening of some unwanted behavior. So the behavior should be observable and measurable. And this observable and measurable behavior happens when there is a stimulus which will then bring a particular response. So can learning be conducted in such a way that the students are always provided some kind of stimulus to bring a particular response which is needed by that particular content or that particular objective that the teacher is trying to seek? As we are dealing with behaviorism, so the first theories that comes in the behaviorism is classical conditioning. And as the word represents classical, which means that's the first one, that's the beginning, the old concept of behaviorism, which is linked with this eminent educational psychologist. If you can identify the name of this educational psychologist. Yes, we can think of this and we can recall this as this name is very highly and closely associated with classical conditioning. And his name is Ivan Pavlov. He was a Russian psychologist, and the year during which he was living is also mentioned. He's also the first Russian psychologist to win Nobel Prize in 1904 with his dog experiment that was conducted in 1902. So after his successful experiment with the dogs and arriving at the classical conditioning, he was finally awarded and he was credited for his work in 1904. Classical conditioning says that when a neutral stimulus is brought, for example a tone, and it linked with a particular another stimulus, then finally it would produce a response which is unexpected. So a neutral stimulus has the potential, has the capacity to produce an unexpected response. But remember, to produce that unexpected response, first of all, the neutral stimulus should be produced, should be associated with a particular kind of situation. Now, what are those situations? Let us discuss in the next slide. So we go to Pavlov's dog experiment. Here is an image in which we can quickly see how classical conditioning was introduced. So Pavlov experimented with a dog, and as we know that whenever food is brought to a dog, so the dog salivate. The dog produces saliva because of seeing the food or the smell of the food. So this food is unconditioned stimulus. It is a stimulus which is not brought by us, which is not created by human. It is unconditioned. There is no condition that is created by human. And the response that is produced by the dog, the saliva, it is unconditioned response. Again, a response which is not produced by our effort. It is natural and therefore it's called unconditioned response. So the next figure, which is a bell. So how much you ring the bell will never produce any response of saliva in the dog. Or this bell can be introduced by different other stimulus beside the food, other than the food, but this will not produce saliva. But when this bell, which is the neutral stimulus because it cannot bring any response in the dog, so when this bell is added with the food, whenever the food is introduced to the dog, at that time when the bell is also rang with the food, so the dog, because it is seeing the food, is salivating. But as both the bell and the food are repeated so often and frequently that after some time, whenever the bell would ring and there is no food, still the dog would salivate on the ringing of the bell. Therefore, this bell has been conditioned. This has been introduced by us. This is human effort. So this has been efforted, this has been worked, and therefore this is called conditioned stimulus, which is resulting in a response which is unexpected. And this is called conditioned response, which is brought because of our conditioned stimulus. Now this Pavlov repeat experiment with different other stimulus, other natural stimulus. For example, sometime there would be a light which is shown on the side of the food, and finally just the flash of light would be enough to make the dog salivate. So here is a diagrammatically representation of classical conditioning. So unconditioned response stimulus is the food, which is giving us the unconditioned response, which is saliva or salivating, and the bell is the neutral stimulus, but when added with the food is producing unconditioned response because this response is linked with the food. But when repeated so often, only the bell, which is the conditioned stimulus now, would produce the dog to salivate, which is the conditioned response.